Sūta uvacha atapradurabhutatra hirannayarato mahan aneka divyaratnangshu kirmirita digantaraha. Sūta said, "Then there appeared a grand chariot made of gold, scattering manifold rays of precious gems to the very ends of the quarters. Nadyupantika pankadhya mahachakra chatushtaya muktatorana sangyukta shvetachchatra shatavritaha." The four huge wheels of the chariot were besmeared with the slush of the Gautamī river. It was bedecked with a festoon of pearls and covered by 100 white canopies. Shuddha hema kalinadhya turanga gana samyutaha shuktavitana vilasa durdva divya vrushadvajaha. Thoroughbred steeds, luminous with hoofs of pure gold, were yoked to the chariot. It was radiant, with a canopy made of pearls. Its brilliant standard with the emblem of a bull was flying aloft. Mattavaranika yukta pattatalpo pashobhitaha Pārijāta tarudbhuta pushpamala bhiranchitaha. Accompanied by elephants in rut, looking resplendent by the 5 elements and their presiding deities, and adorned by garlands with flowers that blossomed in the Pārijāta trees. Mrigana bhisamudbhuta kasturi madapankilaha karpura gadhupota gandha krishta madhuvrataha. Musk secreted in the navel of the musk-deer, making a mire. The swarm of bees attracted by the incense of sandalwood and camphor. Samvarta ghana ghoshadhyo nanavadya samanvitaha Vina Venus vanasakta kinari gana sankulaha. Filled with a tumult like that of the clouds at the time of universal devastation, accompanied by various musical instruments, thronged by teams of canaries pouring out melodies with the lute and flute. Evam drushtva rata shreshtang vrishadutirya sankaraha ambhaya sahitastatra pattatalpe vishatada. Having created thus the best chariot, Shankara got down from the bull and entered the silken seat along with Mother Parvati. Nirajanai surastrinang shveta chamara chalanai divya vyajana pataishcha prahristo nilalohitaha. The blue-throated, tawny-haired Shiva, having been gladdened by the wafting of the white chowri, by the lotus-eyed divine damsels, and the pleasant breeze of the fans. Kvanatkan kana nidvanair mangju manjira sinjitai vina venus vanair gaitai purnamasid jagatrayam. All the 3 worlds were filled with the tinkling sounds of the bracelets, the tintinnabulation of the beautiful anklets, and the lilting melodies of the lute and flute. Shukake kilulavarai shveta paravatasvanai unnidra bhusha paninang darshana deva bardhinaha. All the three worlds were filled with the sweet chirps of the parrots and the calls of the white doves. On the very sight of the snakes adorning Lord Shiva, the peacocks danced, exhibiting numerous eyes on their spread tails. Namaste. So this is actually the beginning of the Shiva Gita, the song of Shiva. In the spiritual world, every word is a song, and every step is a dance. It's not like this world at all. In the spiritual world, one's body is mind-made. And even the Buddha talked about the mind-made body. So this is no secret among spiritually advanced people. But for people conditioned by this world, they have a hard time imagining. How is it possible? Well, it's possible because in the spiritual world, there's no scarcity. If Shiva wants to manifest a huge golden chariot, drawn by thoroughbred horses with golden hoofs, no problem. Poof, there it is. So we have to understand that when Shiva appears, when you get Shiva darshan, his world appears with him. And when you realize Shiva, when you realize Shivoham, Shivoham, that actually I am Shiva, or I am of the same quality as Shiva. At that time, that spiritual world becomes manifest within you. So then there's no more scarcity, no more limited time to do things in. A conversation or even a single word can spread out into a whole song. A single step can become a whole dance. And there's no hurry, no worry. This is the spiritual world. This is where Shiva lives along with his devotees. So if you become a devotee and realize Shiva, you will also live in that world. That is the whole meaning of Shiva Gita. Now, everything up to this point in the book has only been setting the scene. This is just the end of the introduction. And in the next few shlokas, Shiva will begin to speak or sing his Gita. And so what does he say? Well, of course, we'll leave that to him. But basically what he says is that I and you are one. You only appear to be different because of Maya, because of ignorance, because you don't know really who you are. You accept a false designation, a temporary identity, a separated form in a world full of temporariness, instability, change, and suffering. And because you do this, you are wallowing in despair. If you really understood and realized your actual spiritual nature, you would be rejoicing. You would be happy all the time. But because we don't, because we identify with the material body and mind, which are simply illusory, then we go through so many sufferings. Why? Because what we get never measures up to what we want. So we suffer. and the mental suffering due to unfulfilled desires, disappointing efforts, unloyal or disloyal friends, and so on, is much worse than any physical suffering. Because at least with physical suffering, even at the utmost, it has to end in death. But mental suffering can go on and on and on and on. As long as we have desires, because the world will never measure up. It will never satisfy. It will never give us what we want. Try to understand. This is why we have to do sadhana. We have to erase the conditioning. Let go of these identifications with temporary things. And focus on our real self, beyond the material body and mind. That self which is never born and never dies. That is who we really are. So Shiva Gita is like an act of mercy, grace, anugraha, by Shiva, to remind us of the actual position, to tell us about our real condition, and to liberate us from ignorance. That's its main purpose. That we should know who and what we really are. This leads quite directly to the termination of all suffering. Because in the spiritual world, or even in the pure creation of this universe, there's no suffering. There's no lack of anything. One creates a body by one's mind. So there's no birth and death. Even in heaven of the demigods, there is still birth and death. Life is still limited to a certain period of time, but not in the spiritual world. And when one has satisfied all the small desires that one brings to compensate for the suffering of material existence, one easily merges into Brahman. One easily realizes actually our pre-existing identity with Brahman. Because as conscious beings, what else could we be? There is no explanation for consciousness other than we are Brahman covered by a material mind and body. All other materialistic explanations of consciousness are completely bogus and unprovable, easily falsifiable by ordinary logic. For example, they say that consciousness is some kind of epiphenomenon of brain function. But wait a minute. What happens to brain function at the end of life? It stops. Does that mean consciousness stops? Then why are we born with a particular set of tastes and desires and needs? Why are we born in a particular situation and environment? Why isn't everybody the same? There's no other explanation than consciousness is permanent and moves from one body to another, and the dreams and tendencies and desires and habits of the previous life get superimposed on the present body. This is called vasana. Because of vasana, we have inexplicable desires for this thing and that thing and whatever, which arise spontaneously. So there cannot be a cause for those desires in this life. The cause has to be in the previous life. And there's so many logical arguments like this that defeat the materialistic theories of consciousness. If consciousness is impermanent, then when we go to sleep, some people will say we become unconscious. Then how is it that when we wake up, we still remember who we are and what happened yesterday and so on? See, there's nothing to explain the permanence, or at least the persistence of memory. Salvatore Dali was right when he painted those melting watches, and he called it the persistence of memory. That it bends time, it melts time. It brings into relationship this life and the previous lives. And it reminds us of who we are. This is not explainable by any materialistic theory. So actually, logic is not a good tool for spiritual life. A much better tool is devotion. And if we cultivate devotion to Shiva, we soon find our life improving in so many ways. So this is the purpose of Shiva Gita, to inspire us, to encourage us, to direct us toward the path that leads to the end of all suffering. Om Tat Sat. Om Shakti Om. Om Namah Shivaya.